Morning again. My name is Yana Vasquez Ballesteros, Ledge Director for the Department of Toxic Substance Control. Definitely welcome to our Safer Consumer Products Program workload analysis core briefing this morning. So we're going to go ahead and provide a quick run through of the agenda. If you can go to the next slide, Gabby. So we're going to have a quick overview of our comprehensive reform approach in the first 5 minutes or so, and then we're going to go through our programmatic workload analysis findings provided by Cara Palmer. And then from there, we're going to allow 30 minutes for question and answers, and we really will welcome folks to be able to ask any questions regarding this presentation. So we're going to go ahead and share the presentations and the slides before we start, and please look for that through your chat. And then also you're going to have, we're going to reshare the slide decks that we shared with y'all this week, so you guys can have that in front of you. The presentations are going to be a modified version of the slide decks that you have seen already on the website. Again, a lot of the slides we're using are the same slides that we have used to provide a little bit more context. So if there's any information that you want to ask that's not on the presentations, please feel free during the Q&A portion. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Francesca Negri, the Chief Deputy Director for the Department of Toxic Control, who's going to provide you with a quick overview. Next slide.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome, and thank you so much for your interest in DTSC and in our Safer Consumer Products program. We're really excited to be sharing with you in greater detail the results of our workload analyses for this cutting edge program here at DTSC. And I apologize if I'm repeating this for some of you who were able to join us yesterday, but the workload analysis that DTSC undertook supports this administration's proposal for comprehensive fee and governance reform for DTSC. This proposal addresses three important questions. The first being, what level of service should DTSC be providing to ensure it can protect California's environment and public health? And the workload analyses the purpose of them was to take a deep dive into how we're using our resources, a critical look at whether or not we're using them the most efficiently as we can. And so the workload analyses identify specific actions that we've taken to increase our productivity and increase our efficiency, and then to identify some levels of service that DTSC could be providing if it had more resources. It supports that particular element of the administration's proposal. The second question, big question that the proposal addresses, is what fee structure should be in place to support the levels of service. And we talk about a fee structure that is equitably distributed amongst all fee payers, that adheres to the polluter pays principle, and that disincentivizes the mismanagement of hazardous waste generated in the state of California. And finally, the comprehensive reform package addresses the question of what governance structure should be put in place to improve transparency and accountability for all DTSC programs and services. You know how important the work that we do is to public health and to protecting the environment. And the work that we do contributes to economic vitality, and particularly in communities that are disproportionately burdened by hazardous substances. The administration's proposal builds on years of programmatic and service level improvements that DTSC has been undertaking to demonstrate that we are good stewards of public resources, particularly when we're resourced adequately to deliver our services. Over time, DTSC has been hampered by increased increased statutory authorities, and the Safer Consumer Products Program is an example of this situation where we've had a lack of funding to fully implement the program. And we've also we've had some fiscal constraints, and that's impacted the department's overall ability to deliver on its mission. This proposal is a significant investment into DTSC, and it recognizes responsible stewardship of public resources, and that we need to do a better job, as a state agency, as a society, managing our hazardous waste and protecting our vulnerable communities. So I'm excited to have Deputy Director Carl Palmer walk you through the results of the workload analyses that we conducted on the Safer Consumer Products program. And I'm also very excited to engage with you further during the Q&A sessions. And just a note about that, these are the beginning of conversations about DTSC service levels and everything and the entire reform package. And we are looking forward to continuing those conversations subsequent to today's presentation over the ensuing months, so that we can have and hope that this information we're providing today provides transparency into how we're using the resources and a baseline of understanding for what we can and can't do with our resource levels. So Carl, take it away.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I'm really happy to hear from you, and I'm happy that you'll get an opportunity to hear what our findings on our workload analysis and what we've been doing and what our challenge is. So if we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to give a little background on the program. I know many of you are well familiar with what we do and the background, but I want, for those who aren't so familiar, give a brief background. And I'll start with, well, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And I think that what we found is that we know that there are thousands of chemicals in commerce, over 40,000 certainly. And we also know that most of those chemicals have not had thorough assessment of their hazard traits and risk assessment type of work that informs us about what we should be concerned about. We also know that the myriad of state and federal laws that are put in place to protect our people and our environment from these chemicals is incomplete, and everyone has limited authorities and resources, and there are gaps in our protection, certainly. And historically, the California legislature has tried to deal with many of these issues by passing laws that ban or restrict certain chemicals and products, and to some positive effects. But certainly what the legislature recognized back in 2008 was this sort of whack-a-mole process of chemical by chemical, product by product assessment and legislation was a difficult way to make progress, and also didn't allow for the prospective challenge of, if you ban one chemical, what happens if they just drop in another chemical that's similar, but it's not restricted, and we call that a regrettable substitute. So the legislature asked us to move forward and to deal with some of these issues. So go to the next slide. And really, why is this important? Why does it really matter? And I think there's a variety of things I wanted to highlight. First, the picture in the lower left that's my oldest daughter. And when we started this journey, I asked her, tell me what beauty care and personal hygiene products do you use every day? What do you put on your body? And she brought out all this huge array of products on my kitchen counter, which was a little shocking because I already thought she was beautiful. But in any case, what we know is that many of these products are lightly regulated or inadequately regulated, and that there are chemicals in these products that can cause harm to people. And furthermore, we put these products on our body, and many of them, wash off into our aquatic system and then threaten our aquatic environment, and ultimately can lead back to our own drinking water. So there's an issue there, and issues there. And then the graphic in the upper right, which is, I know it's very detailed and hard to read, but this is an example of some of the work we've done when we've been looking at the class of chemical PFAS, or per and polyfluorinated substances that are extremely persistent in the environment. They don't go away, and they have hazard traits that we know cause things like cancer and other adverse impacts. And in our look at carpets, for example, this graphic shows that those chemicals applied to carpets to provide stain and resistance and water resistance get into our environment. They come off the carpet, they get into the dust. The dust is ingested and breathed by our children and us in our homes. The water, when we clean our carpets, goes into the aquatic system. And ultimately, all these things are connected. So the main point there is that these things are complex systems, and chemicals really don't adhere to the laws of man. They adhere to the laws of nature. They go where they go because of their hazardous properties, and we are exposed to them in many different pathways. And we found that these are complex systems. And the fish there, that's a photo of a coho salmon. And the point I wanted to make here is that we are constantly getting new information and trying to answer new questions, and science is emerging. And coho salmon is a good example of that. Just in the last few months, some groundbreaking research out of the Northwest identified a specific chemical that's found in automotive tires that actually runs, when the tires wear down, gets into the aquatic system in Puget Sound and kills coho salmon when they're spawning. This was a mystery for over 10 years. And there are many of these mysteries that we know are problematic that we're trying to solve. So it matters because it affects our families and friends and our communities and our environment. So go to the next slide. So what do we do in response? The legislature asked us to adopt regulations that would deal with this in a new and unique way. The green chemistry laws tasked us to say, how can we look upstream in a preventative way to ensure that we can account across the life cycle of these products, all the adverse impacts, promote a marketplace where we can develop safer chemicals and products that work, and ensure that we don't move towards regrettable substitutes. So we implemented regulations to do just that. And briefly, this little chart on the left shows what the 4 key steps of the regulations are. First, we've identified the chemicals we're concerned about. We call them candidate chemicals. We have a list of those chemicals. It's over 3,100 chemicals right now, and much larger than that if you include those classes of chemicals like PFAS, which in and of themselves have thousands of chemicals. So we identify which chemicals are we concerned about. Then the department, our staff, look closely at that array of chemicals and the menu of the products that contain them. And then we go through the process of identifying which of those products have potential for harm to people or the environment. And we select those products, and we have a rigorous process where we, in a very public way, put out our concerns, ask questions, work with manufacturers and all the stakeholders to get information. Then we select specific products for regulation in our system. At that point, the manufacturers that make those products and want to sell them into California are required to perform some sort of alternatives analysis that we define in our regulations, which is a robust look at identifying potential safer alternatives and looking at all the potential impacts of moving to that safer alternative, with the hope that the manufacturers will do just that, move to something safer. The checks and balances in the process are that DTSC can then go look at that work in the AA and say, if it's not adequate, you need to do further things like inform consumers or inform workers who are exposed to those products, or do further research. And ultimately, we can either restrict or ban the product sale in California. That's the basic framework. I'm going to go into the workload analysis a little deeper that shows how we're implementing those stages of the regulations, which really guide us. You go to the next slide, please. But what are we doing? What are we actually trying to accomplish, and what are we producing in the program right now? If you look at this table, and I know it's a little busy, but along the top, you can see step 2, 3, and 4. The blue one on the left there is the department's efforts, my program staff choosing priority products that we focus on to put in regulation. The step 3 is the alternatives analysis section, which is where the manufacturers do the alternatives analysis. And the 4th step of the process is when we issue a regulatory response as needed. Importantly, we're only partway through implementing this whole process in the regulations. But what we've done so far, the things that have gone the furthest are in the column under the green header, which are the priority products we've already adopted. The first one we did was children's products containing foams related to sleeping, things like nap mats and the cushions in playpens that contained a couple of flame retardants that we knew were carcinogens, and we also knew there were alternatives to those foams that could be used. We adopted that before the regulation hit. The industry recognized that there were safer alternatives, moved to those alternatives. We subsequently tested those products to see that, in fact, they did that. That was a success. And so that action actually has resulted in protecting our children from carcinogens and products that they sleep on and come in close contact with. The second one I'd highlight is our paint strippers with methylene chloride. Historically, those products kill people in California across the country every year because people get overwhelmed with their use. And so we've been looking at that. We put that through the process. The manufacturers went through the alternatives analysis process, and ultimately they decided to either change to a safer product or move out of the California market entirely. So there's a good outcome there. We're just evaluating, to see what they've moved to make sure it is safer. But again, we're making our presence felt in the market and protecting Californians by limiting exposure to these hazardous chemicals in these products. And the last one I'll highlight is the one that's going to be moving into the regulatory response phase this year, which is our spray polyurethane foam products that contain isocyanates. These are threats to workers who spray these foams that are used for insulation and roofing. And again, that product will go into regulatory response, and we'll work on that with the manufacturers. The other two columns on this chart really show what's in the pipeline. The next thing that we'll be regulating are carpets and rugs with PFAS. That'll take effect this summer. And then in that column, we have 4 other products ranging from nail products and other paint removers to laundry detergents and treatment products with PFAS that will be going into the regulatory process this calendar year. And behind that column on the left are other products that we've been researching and working with all of you and externally to research that are also in the queue to be priority products in the future. The main point of this slide is we're doing a lot, and we're only partway through the process. So more to come on that. And the benefit of our workload analysis in part is that it's given us insight into what it takes for us to actually produce these outcomes and outputs. Let's go to the next slide, please. Before we dive a little deeper into the actual analysis, it's important you know who we are. Our group is small. We're the smallest core program at DTSC with only 41 dedicated staff. Our mission is big. We're really blessed to have an amazing group of staff, 28 scientists and engineers, some economists and analysts, and a great management team. Our budget's a little under $10 million, at least it was then. It's about the same now. And importantly, these resources came back in 2012 when, in implementing the regulations and the statute, we didn't get new resources. What we did was we diverted resources from our existing pollution prevention program to deal with this prioritized work. And we knew at the time that we needed to get started. We were building a brand new program. We didn't know how to do these things. We weren't clear on exactly how much work it was going to take. So we got started knowing that we would need more resources. And that's what we've pretty much maintained since then. Anyway, we're really blessed to have this great staff. But that's who's doing the work. If we go to the next slide. What did the workload analysis show us? Well, we were really pleased to see that what it told us is that 75% of our time is really being spent on those direct products and outputs that align with our regulations and our mandate. We're researching priority products and putting them in regulation. We're supporting the alternatives analysis process that manufacturers conduct. We're developing new regulations to adopt more products. And then we're also importantly supporting the process by developing things like our CalSafer web portal, which really has allowed us to put out our candidate chemical list in a searchable database that everyone can see. It also is a portal where all of our public documents, both for rulemaking and for draft priority products, and to get input from everyone, are put out very publicly, and everyone can give us input and see everyone else's input. That was a big effort with our IT shop and our staff, but it was important to support what we were doing. And of course, I wanted to highlight that you may have heard Meredith say that information is the coin of the realm for us. And this is so true. This is why it's really critical that we get your input both today, but as we go through these processes, because what we found is that there are an awful lot of details and important factors, both in how products are manufactured, the science behind the hazards and exposure that those chemicals present, and then how we can prioritize our work based on good information and make good decisions. So we're spending most of our time doing that core work. Next slide, please. I want to give you a little insight, boring down even further into the workload analysis of how this works and the level of detail we get. If you look at the chart on the left, this aligns with that 75% of our work. And the bottom bar in blue is what we call chemical and product evaluation. That is our team of scientists and engineers doing the research to identify which products we're going to focus on and to get all the information supporting our decision making. Then we have the other bars represent our alternatives analysis work, our rulemaking work, the operations work to support both development of CalSafer, our public processes, workshops, et cetera. And then there's a little bar on the top. We do a little bit of work to implement the brake pad laws that were passed that restrict the levels of certain metals in brake pads. That's a small piece of our work. If you look to the pie chart on the right, what you can see is that pie chart represents all the data behind the blue bar on the bottom, which is is that team spending their work? And it's difficult to see, but each one of those slices of the pie is a specific project. It's a specific potential priority product, whether that's personal care products, whether it's nail products, whether it's a multitude of other things we're looking at. We're breaking this out so that we can see how much time it takes us to do the core work of our program. And because our resources are limited, we have to balance these across the whole program. And so this level of detail has been very helpful to us internally, to our management, and to our staff for project management, which is what I want to talk about next. If we go to the next slide. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I also want to highlight that while our focus is in delivering and executing on identifying products and putting things through the process, that there are key parts of what we need to do to make that work and to be smart. So this is a new program. We had to build capacity to say, how can we do this work when we're doing something entirely new? So we've done a lot of work to provide guidance to the regulated community. For example, we developed the alternatives analysis guidance document, which is about 300 pages of guidance, examples, templates that help people do AAs in our framework. We've also done training externally and internally for our staff. We developed the web portal, and we also work hard to leverage the work of others because we're on the cutting edge of a lot of scientific information and principles and practices. And so things like hosting the international symposium for the advancement of alternatives assessment processes. We did that in November of 2019 and had people from all over the world participating to talk about how you do these key things we're trying to do. We need to keep developing these things so we can do good work and stay on the cutting edge of what we're doing. So now on to the next slide, in terms of what are we doing to ensure that we're doing a good job and that we're being efficient and that with our limited resources, we're making smart decisions. First off, we had the ability, because we made it the time accounting system such that we could get this data so that we could see what we're doing and how well we're doing and monitor and track, which is really important. We also in our program implemented a very rigorous project management system and culture where we trained all our staff. We have templates and roadmaps. We have a process that we go about so that everything we do, we're cognizant of what's the outcome we're trying to achieve, what's the schedule we're going to do it in, and what are the resources needed to do it. And we trained ourselves to that. We've also done things like a Lean Six Sigma project that helped us look at our process. The first products we adopted took quite a while to adopt. And so we went back and said, well, how can we improve that process? And we found that we could cut that time by about 60%, which we've seen. And that's going to continue to improve, hopefully. And then also, I wanted to highlight that we're going to be putting out in the near term, in the next month or so, our SCP timeline that will be publicly available so people can see at that project level where we are in each project, what we're doing, what the steps are, because we'd heard from stakeholders that, wow, we only see the milestone when it comes up. We know you're working on it, but what are you doing? How long does it take? So that's going to improve our transparency. It makes us stronger because you can keep us in check to make sure we're meeting our commitments, as well as you can help us meet those commitments by engaging when we need your help. So those are some of the things we're doing. We're in our continuous improvement model. Go on to the next slide, please. So what were some of the findings? I think the most important thing we found was that with our limited resources, that our and a program that has only gone partway through the process is that what we recognize is that with those resources, as we move things through the process, we're going to have to shift resources to address those new parts of work. So what you see in this chart on the bar chart on the right is that the blue bar, where there's these are outputs, by the way, where we had 12 outputs in 1920, that those are identifying new products to regulate and to research. That as those products enter the system, then we have to shift to doing the regulations to adopt them. Then we have to shift to the alternatives analysis process, which we're only partway through. And then ultimately, we're going to not only have to deal with regulatory responses, but we're going to have a commitment to ensure that those people that are regulated are in compliance and that we enforce the laws and regulations as necessary. Those things have not even been done yet. So what we see is, most simply, is that bar is going to have to shrink to accommodate the work in the other areas of the program. And so our hope is that we'll be able to reach a normalization of productivity that accommodates all parts of the process, but we're not there yet. And so that reduction, which is about an anticipated 80% reduction in new products, if we stay at the same level, is the things we're going to be facing. Note there's uncertainty because if you tuned into Grant's presentation yesterday about site cleanups, not every product is the same. And much like a site cleanup is not all the same. We have some that are very complex that might have, dozens of manufacturers or more, and some that are simpler. And so we're trying to get that data as we do it so we can be smarter and more efficient. Next slide, please. So how are we going to deal with that gap? And what does it need to look like? We believe that we need to be putting about 5 products into the process every year to have a reasonable level of impact on these problems. And let's just note that that's a reasonable level of accomplishment. The scale of this is potentially huge. There are thousands of products out there. There are thousands of chemicals. There are all kinds of things that we could be looking at. This also highlights the importance of your engagement with us to give us good information so that we can prioritize our work to get the most bang for our buck. We want to be as effective as possible to protect people and our environment with what we've got. So to do that, we see a need for additional resources. Go to the next slide. That gap we would project would need to be filled with about almost doubling the size of the program. And this chart really looks at, breakdown based on our workload analysis, the types of staff we would need to accomplish that based on the unmet needs of regulatory response, compliance, and enforcement down the road, and the ongoing implementation of the program, and still maintaining a reasonable flow of work into the program. I want to note, too, this doesn't include, importantly, other resources within the department, which are critical to our ability to provide this service. As Francesca has noted before, is that we're focusing on the scientists and engineers cranking out the work. We need people in our HR shop to hire the good people. We need people in our contract shop to make sure that we can get that contract support that we need. We need to have the support in a wide variety of places, from our legal shop to our toxicologist to IT, to make the program work. And those aren't directly reflected entirely in this workload analysis. That's coming as we roll out the entire workload analysis for the department. That's really important. And next slide. So my last slide, I want to say, what are the key takeaways? The key takeaways are we're really doing a lot of really great stuff. It's new. We're building our program. We're starting to execute. We're showing results, but we're only partway there. And with that, we're doing everything we can to be efficient, to be effective, to be transparent, to let people know what the challenges are, and to get help by getting good information to reach that mutual goal that we all have. But there are significant limitations given our level of resources to get to the program to a level that we really feel needs to be impactful and to meet our mandate, which is really to protect the people, environment of California from hazardous chemicals and product, and to promote safer products that are both effective and safe. So that's my last slide. That's my summary, and I'll turn it back over at this point to Gianna or Francesca.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Carl. And with that, though, we're actually just to wrap up. So we went through a really quick comprehensive reform overview, and this is a continuation that we have had on previous briefings. And then just as Carl mentioned, went through the analysis on key findings for the Safer Consumer Program. And then really now is really getting into a little bit more of the analysis of slide decks, and it's going to really have this moment, the next 25 minutes will allow for the group to actually ask any questions, clarifying questions, or anything that we can actually be able to provide a little bit more context. So with that, we are going to use a Q&A feature. So please, you have the ability to write your questions through the Q&A feature and also raise your hand so I can go ahead and provide y'all ability to ask your questions. So we'll open it up to the group. And then I have a question specifically. Let me open it up. So I have a question from Jane Williams. Hold on. Go ahead, Jane. You can unmute, yeah.
Actually, I have a couple questions. Well, first of all, can we add baby food products, to the mix here, given the news today?
Good question, Jane. There are a few provisions in the statute which limit our ability to regulate certain things, and those things are actually food, medical and dental products, pesticides, and prescription drugs. But I will say that, yeah,
that's
I would say,
unfortunate, isn't it, Carl?
well, I mean, I think it's an important issue, no doubt. Certainly, it's a good example that FDA's at the federal level, the depth and breadth of their authority and ability to regulate those things is certainly an issue. We are looking at food packaging, and specifically, we're leveraging our work on PFAS in carpets and rugs to look at food packaging containing PFAS, things like pizza boxes and fast food wrappers and others, because we do recognize there's some issues there. But
yeah, I saw that they just did 100 ppm standard. What's the point of that, right? Especially when we're going to try to compost that. It's like we need to get away from that completely. Not 100 ppm is a huge amount of perfluorinated.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we found is that products are complex and there are a lot of issues. And when you look at the regulatory framework, they potentially cross a lot of different authorities, and we don't have the ability to go counter to any state or federal law, but there's plenty of opportunities to see where there's gaps and to try to fill those important gaps.
Right. So, as you know, the hexachlorocyclododecane was added to the Stockholm Convention, and so my question was: have we taken a look at that? Because I know it's been added to the insulating foams, and now it's like a huge problem, a huge disposal problem that I don't believe that we're adequately confronting. But when you're looking at these foam products, are you going to look at HBCD as well as the isocyanates?
Yeah, good question, Jane. Well, in the foam products, our focus was on methyl diisocyanates, which are problematic to the people that spray those foams. And not to get too wonky, but if foams are a polymer, there's an A side and a B side. The A side is the isocyanates, and the B side contains a variety of chemicals. I don't know if HBCD is in there, but there are other things like blowing agents and flame retardants and things which may be of concern. And we're not focusing on that. That's not to say they aren't potential issues. I think it also highlights that many manufactured products are complex and contain many, many chemicals. Tires is another example. We are going to be pursuing looking at zinc in tires because it's an aquatic toxicant, and the stormwater agencies asked us to look at that. But we're also, based on this information on coho salmon impacts, going to be looking at 6-PPD. But their tires contain thousands of chemicals. So this is part of the challenge of where we focus our resources to where we think we can make a difference.
Well, that kind of brings me to the point. I think one of the criticisms can be of the program is like, if you're going to look at tires, why just focus on one chemical in the tire, right? Like, look at tires from a lens of sustainability. The same thing with the spray foams. There's no point in regulating the isocyanates in the spray foams and letting them continue to spray hexabromocyclododecane, which is a chemical so toxic that it's basically on a phase-out ban through international treaties, which the United States hasn't signed yet. it's like, I think if the state of California is going to spend its resources to look at a consumer product, it needs to look at the consumer product in a whole, not just one chemical that's part of that consumer product.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jane. It's technically quite a challenge for some things, certainly. And I think, again, one of the things we've seen is that engaging with manufacturers on these issues and these concepts is positive. We've seen impacts where people are looking at more holistically their products and our lists, importantly, of candidate chemicals and saying, hey, if this chemical is on the list, why are we using it? Can we move away to something that's safer? Whether that's to avoid regulation or to do the right thing, it is working.
Thanks for that, Carl.
Okay, thank you, Jane. And then the next person I have is Andrea Ventura. So if you want to go ahead, Andrea, and unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So hi, Carl. Thanks for your presentation and for your hard work. I was wondering if you could speak a little more to how you're making the front end of the process more efficient. You said you were able to cut the time by 60%, because one of the things that we struggle with, obviously, is while this is meant to be a deliberative process, you've really got to study what's out there and make hard decisions based on the information you have, so we get the biggest bang for our buck. It does take a long time just to get to the listing of a product, a chemical product combination, so that we get moving on it. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to how you're making that more efficient and moving that a little quicker.
Yes, great question. Thanks, Andrea. Well, as you know, in building the program, we were in uncharted territory, and we felt it was very important, especially initially, that the quality of our work and the rigor of our science was sound and defensible. And so we spent a lot of time ensuring that and developing these processes. And I'll point to carpets and rugs with PFAS as a good example for two things. One, there was a lot of work that went into that. The profile document, the technical document, contains over 300 references. We read all those papers, and there's a lot of great work in there. We've used that work to help us inform us about PFAS in general. And that's why we're looking at treatment products like Scotchgard, is why we're looking at food packaging with PFAS. And so we're leveraging that good work to be more efficient in subsequent product evaluations. The other thing we're doing, I think, is our project management work, and Lean Six Sigma is saying, some of this is about decision making, and we're looking at things like systematic review to be able to better assess the literature, to hone in on the kind of seminal papers that are solid, that can accelerate decision making without having a completely comprehensive look at maybe 300 or more papers. So those types of things are things we're doing. I think this is also important to note that one of our challenges is information gathering. A lot of the information we need is not public. We've taken steps to use the limited authorities we have to get that information, and with some success. We just did our NAILS information call-in to the manufacturers that we are receiving information on now, but that's a lot of work too. So I guess what I'd say ultimately is we need continued engagement to give us feedback about, are we focusing on the right things? And then how are we doing? Which is why we're putting out our timeline, so that we can be more transparent about that. And I'd like to say too, just note that hopefully today, if not today, Monday, we'll be putting out our draft priority product to work plan for 2021 through 2023, which will highlight the categories of products we're looking at, the new ones we're looking at, including tires, looking at children's products. And we'll need feedback as a draft. We want to hear from people about where are those spots where we can be most effective? And accelerating the front end is a big part of that, because then we can get into the process where the manufacturers are doing the heavy lifting on doing the alternatives analysis.
Can I just do a quick, Deanna, can I just ask a quick follow-up to that? So as far as the data call-in, that is, we've obviously spoken about that in the past. Is that something that, as you look at the budget, that is going to be needed to move forward through this plan with the administration, you're also trying to build in the data, clarity on your data calling authority?
Yeah, well, I think we're evaluating its effectiveness with the first one we've done. We sent out requests to about a little under 200 manufacturers. We had to establish in our CalSafer portal a way for them to submit confidential business information safely. We got a return rate of about 16% because it's voluntary. And so we'll see the level of effort and the cost benefit. And it somewhat depends on the industry. But I think I would point back to those other key things we need to continue to do is leveraging the work with other colleagues nationally and internationally, which we're doing through A4, through the Interstate Chemicals Clearinghouse, working with our colleagues in Washington, for example, who have different laws but similar objectives, to share information and data. We're trying to be smart. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to be in the right space. And the other thing I would say, Andrea, is that one of the big needs we really have is looking at the emerging needs for exposure science skills and data mining. Those are key things that we're going to need to build on.
Thanks, Carl.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. So the next person will be Ingrid Brostrom. So Ingrid, do you want to go? And go ahead and mute yourself.
Great. I have two questions. So my first question, one is, trying to really figure out what the overarching, 5,000 foot goal of, what the project success looks like. And I did hear, the overarching goal is 5 products a year. And I was wondering if you could give a little more information about why 5? Why is that the right number to meet whatever the overarching goal of this program is? And then the second question is, the Safer Consumer Products Program did take funding from the Pollution Prevention Program.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if there's been any analysis on what it would take to reestablish the P2 program, and so that these two things aren't pitted against each other, but really seen as, addressing different issues and both being very important to our state.
Yeah, great questions, Ingrid. Well, first, in terms of the overarching goal, I would say the overarching goal really isn't 5 or 6 or 10. It's to the extent we can with what we've got, protect people and the environment from chemicals and products. And so, we've had discussions with people that you could make an analogy with climate change, is that the scale of this is huge. So we will expand and fill that gap as best we can with what we've got. 5 is a function of something that we think is manageable and credible with what we've got right now, and where we could be incrementally. It could certainly grow. So that is a value-based question, which is how good is good enough? What we're trying to do is do the best with what we've got. And I think that discussion about what really is the level that's appropriate to meet the mandate is a good question. And I think that's part of why we're having that dialogue with you in the greater context of the department's service levels for our mandates. So we can do more if we have the ability. As far as the P2 issue, and that's something near and dear to my heart because I was the branch chief for P2 before coming to SAFER, is that first recognize that P2 did a lot of good things, and that, but there were a lot of challenges as well. And Rizgar is going to be talking about that as part of his presentation next week. I think there's two or four scheduled, but that's in the hazardous waste management program. When we recognize, and we all believe in prevention, our SAFER program is a prevention program, if you will, and certainly we'll be looking at what we can and should be doing in terms of pollution prevention as well. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I just think that, again, back to why we're doing this in the first place is what do we got to do, what needs to be done, and how can we do it?
So, and Ingrid, thank you so much for the question. And we will be talking about the, we did analyze the P2 program. It's provided in our policy and program support branch workload analyses. So we'll get to that conversation next week about the resources that we've identified would be necessary to reinvent the program, modernize it, and we look forward to that conversation.
And might I just follow up quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
So with the first question, which is a little bit of my initial frustration when the summary of the workload analysis came out, was a lack of overarching goals and aspirations. Because if we're really looking at what we need to do with DTSC to get it to a place that is really working, that's where we need to start, rather than this place of constraint and like we'll do as much as we can. And so I do think it's worth, even if we know that we won't be able to reasonably meet that in the near future, really setting out those aspirational goals, I think is super critical as we're taking this deeper look at DTSC and how we really want to shape this department moving forward. So I think it would be worth some time diving into that first question, which is, what would it really take to make a big difference with this program?
And Ingrid, you make a really good point, which is, and that's the first, component of the administration's proposal, which is to answer the question, what service levels should DTSC be providing? The intent of the workload analyses was to do a deep dive into how we're using our resources to make sure that we're using them as efficiently as we possibly can. And it was pretty much a data-driven process to identify, our outputs and increase our efficacy with our business processes. So it wasn't necessarily meant to be, as we've indicated, a comprehensive analysis of all of our statutory authorities. And while we provided some examples of service levels that are currently unfunded, really looking forward to more conversations with you all about, whether or not the areas that we chose to use as examples are adequate, or whether or not we should be including other service levels, or, as you indicated, what does a broader approach to the Safer Consumer Products program look like, and what are its impacts? But at least we can tell you, here's what we're doing with our current resources, and it provides a baseline of understanding for how the department is currently resourced.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you, Ingrid. And with that, I'll go and send it off to Avi. Avi, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a couple of related questions to the previous couple of speakers, Ingrid and Andrea's questions. The first, following up on Ingrid's questions, you've identified some gaps and needs here, and I'm wondering how those gaps and needs are going to be reflected in the reform proposal and how that's going to interact with the broader reform proposal for DTSC. If you could speak to the specifics of what you hope to see and how that's going to cover the gaps and how that's going to interact with a broader picture, I'd be interested to hear that. And then the second question I have is related to what Andrea raised about data collection and a way to reduce resource needs by having a clearer authority and less work required for the collection of that data. As you might recall, there was a bill in play in the last couple of years where industry removed its opposition, which would basically give the agency clear authority to collect that data with likely less work. And I'm interested to hear whether concepts like that will be part of the reform proposal going forward.
Well, Avi, thanks for your questions. I think I'll let Francesca answer the broader question in terms of, how does this fit into our overarching processes, and then I can deal with the data collection issue if you like.
Well, I mean, certainly the proposal, the administration's proposal does address, some key issues of how we're resourced and what levels of fee are necessary in order to deliver a department that more adequately protects public health and the environment. I think part of the board's responsibility is to be in concert with the director of the organization, be looking at DTSC and its service levels and making determinations about what the department should be doing in the future. That's part of that comprehensive approach to to fee and governance reform. So, whether or not, to Ingrid's point, the resource gaps that we identified today are sufficient. I think further conversation with our stakeholders is absolutely necessary, and I would see that as part of the board's responsibility as well.
Yeah, and Avi, on your second part of your question, as you know, and you pointed out, our ability to require information on ingredients in products is very limited. Certainly enhancing that would be helpful. We are constantly engaging in a very public way to ask for that information. And depending on the company and the product, we have varying levels of success. I do think that there are efforts that are helping us. Certainly, some of the movement towards transparency and product ingredient disclosure nationwide is helpful because we see leading manufacturers being more comfortable with providing that information. We take steps to do things like ask for it. We also use purchase databases to collect information, and we do our own research. But anything we can do to enhance transparency on product ingredient information is helpful to us, it's helpful to consumers, it's helpful to manufacturers as well. And we see that certainly within the supply chains of products. So look at Prop 65. Some of the small companies are trying to comply with Prop 65 and have difficulty getting information of the chemicals in their supply chain. So movement to allow government to get that information and to encourage manufacturers to provide it is certainly helpful for us.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to Avi, it's one of the things as we start having these conversations on comprehensive reform is definitely bringing these issues up and really trying to really have a conversation with the legislature and the administration on how we can actually be able to see these issues as one. But also, what Francesca basically mentioned, really considering the level of service where we're at and how do we start really bringing these different additional concepts, right? So I would just add to just continue the conversation and really flag these issues as we start moving into really kind of having more of that policy and the budget conversations. Okay.
Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you. And then with that, I'm going to have Lizette go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Lizette, Breast Cancer Prevention Partners. So my question is again somewhat similar, and I'll preface it by saying that we've seen in the European Union they have just a little over 200 substances of very high concern, and they've recently done a database where manufacturers of consumer products have to report the presence of these chemicals in their products, and they've had something like 5 million notifications already just in the first few weeks and months. So if we anticipate that we have a somewhat similar situation here, with over 3,000 chemicals of concern, 5 priority products a year, it isn't ultimately not going to get us where we need to be in less than several hundred years. So my question is, how can you best, along with, participating in the conversations that we need to have about what is the ultimate goal and where do the legislators and the state of California need to take us, how can you build on work and measures and research done in other jurisdictions and other regions and internationally, so that you're not always, behind where the industry is going? The example of McDonald's phasing out of PFAS in its food packaging. What are ways that you can really make sure that you are leveraging a very small area to really create chain reactions down the line?
Great points and questions, Lizette. Let me just highlight a few things. One, we try to the extent we can, coordinate with everyone from the EU to the various states and advocacy, academia, industry on staying on top of what's going on so that we can pick spaces that are meaningful and effective and not reinventing the wheel or being redundant. Similarly, we're hopeful with the new administration in Washington that our previously really productive relationship with EPA will be that once more, and so that we can coordinate with them, because they have incredible resources that can help us and do help us. Office of Research and Development is working with us on modeling, for example. We're taking the EU information as best we can. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. So it is important that we stay connected and that we learn from everyone else. I think that the EU model has a lot of benefits we don't have in the US in terms of both their culture of collaboration and recognition of the importance of market forces. So, but we're trying to be strategic. This is why we need your help in our work plan to identify things that will make a difference, because the denominator is huge. And the other thing I would say, and I'll use BCPP as a good example, is the report that you folks put out last year on cancer and the various modes of action is really amazing work and important. And we use that to inform us about how we might look at specific products and specific chemicals to be in a space that it can be effective. So it's an ongoing process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, thank you, Lizette. With that, it's 11 o'clock, but I have one more person who's been waiting patiently. So Jane, if you want to go and ask your question, definitely. And you are able, if you can unmute yourself. And this is for you. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Jen Jackson, City of San Francisco. My question is not too dissimilar from others, but I'm curious about the 5 products and whether it's possible to lump things a little bit more so that you can, for example, do artificial turf and carpet at once, as opposed to having those be separate products. And by the same token, where are some possibilities of lumping chemicals, so classes of chemicals, so that you're able to tackle more products at once? And then a second quick question is whether treated wood waste will be one of the products in the priority work plan. Thanks.
Okay. Good questions, Jen. Well, first on your first part of the question is, it's important to know that when we look at products and chemicals, we do look as holistically as we can at all the chemicals in the product. Because just as that first chart I showed you on PFAS, we recognize that multiple chemicals, multiple pathways, multiple potential for exposure. So we're trying to sort through the ones that have the most adverse impact and that we can make a difference on. And that can be very challenging for when there are multiple chemicals of concern. But we try to take that into account. The other thing is that not all chemicals are created equal. Not all products, similar products have the same factors. And we found that it really does matter about the details. And so that's a challenge. Carpets and rugs is a good example. We excluded outdoor carpets and turf because our primary concern was with carpets and rugs in the indoor environment. So not to say there aren't issues. We're going to be looking at artificial turf in the next work plan. And to your second point, we just putting out today the new work plan. We love input. If you want us to look at treated wood waste, we can look at that. Although I think that would probably not necessarily be a high priority, given that the question would be, what are the safer alternatives? I think it's a good question, but we'll put that in the hopper and get input from everyone to see if that would maybe rise to something we would look at. But that's a good example of we don't know. We only know what we know, so we really rely on everyone to tell us, to help us educate us about other issues that we might want to consider.
No, there are safer alternatives, so we hope that you will consider that one.
Well, let me just say, add on that, Jen, is that part of the thing too is that if there are readily available safer alternatives, other people doing good work, it may not be the best space for us to be in. A good example is you'll see in the new work plan, we've made the determination we're not going to pursue alternatives to lead acid batteries. That's not to say there aren't issues with lead acid batteries. We all know there are significant issues there. We've seen that here in California. And we also know that there are billions of dollars of R&D money going into safer alternatives to lead acid batteries. The EU alone in the last couple of weeks announced another 4 billion euro. So our ability to move the needle on stimulating research is not really where we think a good use of our time. And that applies maybe to other products as well.
Okay, Thank you. And with that, we have all the questions. There's a question that we can actually answer privately, just given the time, but definitely want to allow just a couple thoughts and concluding comments for both Carl and Francesca before we close.
Well, let me start and then on Francesca and wrap up. I really just want to say thank you for not just for today and listening, but thank you for many of you have engaged with us over the years and building this program and getting us to where we are. We really appreciate that. And I'm also thanking you ahead of time for your continued engagement, because we need that to make the program better and more effective. I think we're doing a great job on many fronts, but we need everyone's input, support, and we really welcome your questions, your suggestions, and we're looking forward to the journey ahead.
And I'll just echo Carl and express my gratitude for your being here today, your interest in DTSC, your fantastic questions. Clearly, the results of this workload analyses are not surprising. We're under-resourced to fully implement the program. This is part of a comprehensive approach to improving DTSC's ability to protect public health and the environment. And I think what came out of this conversation is, really important that, what level of service should SAFER be resourced for in order to fully have a bigger impact and to, protect our environment and public health. So thank you again for your engagement today. We're really looking forward to this not being just one conversation, but a series of conversations. Happy to provide you with additional detail. If you haven't already been able to take a look at the full slide deck of SAFER's workload analyses, it is available on our website at www.dtsc.ca.gov. And I look forward to continuing these conversations with all of you in the future. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
have a good one.